On the morning they opened the 8th box, the warehouse smelled like salt, mildew, and death. The crate had been pried loose from the hull of a merchant vessel seized along the James River in the winter of 1811. It was unremarkable. Pine boards, iron nails, a shipping mark burned into its side. But inside, beneath layers of oilcloth and straw, lay 8 velvet pouches. Inside each pouch was a wedding ring, and beside each ring, wrapped carefully in linen, was a small glass vial containing residue of something bitter and faintly sweet. Poison. The dock workers swore later that the air itself changed when the customs officer lifted the final pouch, not because of what they saw, but because of what they understood. 8 rings, 8 men, and only one woman had worn them all. Her name was Ruth Holloway, but Richmond had once known her by another title, the grieving widow, nearly 30 years. Earlier, in the sweltering summer of 1782, Ruth Holloway arrived in Virginia society with nothing but a mourning dress and a story. Her husband, Jonathan Holloway, had been executed for treason, a British agent, they said, a traitor to the American cause, shot by Patriot soldiers after being exposed as a spy in the final years of the Revolutionary War. Ruth had not denied it. She had stood before Richmond's elite with hollow eyes and trembling hands and whispered only this: "My husband trusted the wrong men." It was a sentence that carried more truth than anyone realized. Jonathan Holloway had indeed been a British agent, but not the villain history painted. He had been a broker of information, a man who navigated the gray waters between empires. And in 1779, he had discovered something that would cost him his life: a secret network operating inside Virginia's political and military elite. They called themselves the Covenant of Prosperity. 8 prominent men, merchants, officers, officials, who had quietly sold intelligence to both sides during the war. They shifted loyalties like coin across a table, ensuring profit no matter who won. When Jonathan discovered proof of their duplicity, he made a fatal miscalculation. He tried to blackmail them. Within weeks, Patriot authorities received anonymous intelligence identifying Jonathan as a British spy. His trial was swift. His execution, public. The covenant survived. Ruth did not, at least, not the woman she had been. Richmond embraced her with sympathy. A beautiful young widow, barely 23. Pale skin, steady gray eyes, and a composure that suggested fragility rather than fury, she wore her grief like armor. Soft-spoken, polite, devout. Men were drawn to her immediately, not because she was seductive, because she seemed safe. Her first remarriage came 2 years later. Colonel Thomas Fairfax, a respected landowner, widower, wealthy, and eager to rescue a tragic woman from loneliness. He died 18 months after their wedding. Heart failure, the physician concluded. A tragic weakness of constitution. Ruth wept convincingly. She inherited generously. The second husband lasted slightly longer, the third shorter. By the 4th, society had begun whispering about her misfortune. Some women avoided dining invitations to her home. Some men hesitated, but none could prove anything, and none could resist her. Because Ruth did not simply poison men, she studied them. She learned their habits, their weaknesses, their vanities. She tailored her methods accordingly. Foxglove for one, arsenic for another. Subtle tinctures of hemlock diluted into tonics prescribed by unsuspecting doctors. Each death was unique. Each death appeared natural, and each husband shared one common trait. They had been members of the Covenant of Prosperity. Ruth kept meticulous records, not in plain ink, in cipher, hidden among recipes and scripture verses in a leather-bound journal that never left her private chambers. She tracked symptoms, timelines, doses, behavioral patterns, emotional vulnerabilities. She also tracked something else: guilt, not her own, theirs. She attended their private conversations, listened to their drunken boasts, noted the casual references to necessary wartime decisions. The dismissive laughter when Jonathan Holloway's name surfaced in passing. They never recognized her stillness as calculation, They mistook her silence for submission. They never imagined that the widow at the end of the table was measuring their pulse rates with her eyes. 7 men died over a span of 10 years. 7 funerals. 7 inheritances. 7 velvet pouches prepared in secret, each containing a ring. Each ring paired with a vial, carefully preserved residue of the poison used. Not trophies, evidence, proof of justice delivered because Ruth was not killing blindly. She was crossing names off a list, and she believed there were 8. The 8th man was the most powerful of them all, Governor Edmund Randolph. Unlike the others, he had never married her. He had been too cautious, too intelligent. He had watched the pattern unfold from a distance, had attended funerals with a tight smile, had offered condolences with eyes that lingered a moment too long. Ruth knew he suspected, and she knew suspicion was not proof. That was the beauty of her design. But she also knew something else. He had been the leader, the architect of the covenant, the one who made the decision to eliminate Jonathan, the one who signed the letter that sealed her husband's fate. For 13 years, she had waited for this final confrontation. She believed that, once Randolph fell, her work would be complete. 8 men, 8 deaths, balance restored. What she did not yet know, what no one in Richmond yet understood, was that the covenant of prosperity had never been 8, it had been 9. And somewhere in the city, a man was quietly gathering evidence. Captain Jonathan Hale, a former intelligence officer, methodical, disciplined, unimpressed by grief. He had noticed patterns others dismissed, the identical timing between marriages and deaths, the financial consolidations, the servants who disappeared shortly after each funeral. Hale did not believe in coincidence, and he did not believe in fragile widows. He began interviewing enslaved workers attached to the Holloway estates, those who moved unseen through hallways and kitchens, those who witnessed the preparation of tonics and the burning of letters. Slowly, a picture formed, not complete, but unsettling. Ruth sensed the shift before she knew its source. Invitations became colder, eyes lingered longer, whispers grew sharper. For the first time in 13 years, she felt something close to uncertainty. Not fear, not yet, but awareness. A predator recognizes when it is being tracked, and Ruth Holloway had survived too long to ignore instinct. She began watching the watchers, and soon she learned Captain Hale's name. On the night she confirmed his involvement, she stood alone in her study and opened the leather journal. She turned to the final page where 8 names were written, 7 crossed out, 1 remaining. Edmund Randolph. She studied the ink for a long time. Then, beneath Randolph's name, she added another, Jonathan Hale. Her hand did not tremble, because whether he was covenant or not, he had become an obstacle, and obstacles were eliminated. Justice, she believed, required completion. The following week, Governor Randolph requested a private meeting, and when Ruth entered his office, she carried in her reticule a small glass vial, not because she intended to use it immediately, but because she never entered a battlefield unarmed. She believed she was walking into the final act of a 13-year campaign. She was wrong, because when Randolph smiled and said, "My dear Mrs. Holloway, I believe we have been hunting each other," the game changed, and the widow who had orchestrated 7 perfect deaths realized for the first time she was no longer the only strategist. In the room, Governor Edmund Randolph did not rise when Ruth entered. That was the first signal. In Richmond's highest circles, etiquette was currency. Men stood for women, especially widows, especially wealthy ones, especially those whose estates now rivaled minor aristocracy. But Randolph remained seated behind his mahogany desk, hands folded, studying her as one might examine a chessboard mid-match. "My dear Mrs. Holloway," he said smoothly, "you have become a most remarkable woman." Ruth inclined her head, allowing a measured smile. Tragedy requires adaptation, Governor. Indeed it does. Silence stretched between them, not awkward, but deliberate. A battlefield disguised as courtesy. On the far wall, portraits of revolutionary heroes stared down from gilded frames. Washington, Jefferson, patriots immortalized in oil and reverence. Ruth wondered how many of them would have survived if men, like Randolph, had not quietly profited from both sides. I've been reviewing certain financial patterns, Randolph continued. Land transfers, inheritances, maritime shipments. Efficiency offends you? She asked gently. No, he said, only repetition. There it was, not accusation, recognition. Randolph leaned back in his chair. 7 husbands, Mrs. Holloway, all connected directly or indirectly to the covenant of prosperity. The name was spoken softly, but it detonated between them. Ruth did not blink. I'm unfamiliar with that organization. Of course you are. He reached into a drawer and withdrew a single sheet of paper. Not a ledger. Not a confession. A copy of Jonathan Holloway's execution order, signed in Patriot ink. I imagine you've read this document many times, Randolph said. Ruth's fingers tightened imperceptibly at her sides. I was present when it was signed, he continued. Your husband was careless. My husband was loyal, she replied. Randolph's lips curved slightly. He was curious. That word. Curious. A polite synonym for dangerous. The room felt smaller. You've done extraordinary work, Mrs. Holloway, Randolph said calmly. Methodical. Patient. 7 deaths over 13 years. Each one defensible. Each one profitable. You flatter me. I respect you. And that unsettled her more than accusation would have. Respect implied parity. Parity implied danger. Randolph stood then, walking slowly toward the window overlooking the James River. The covenant was never about treason, he said. It was about survival. The revolution was chaos. Empires shift, borders redraw. Men who survive chaos are men who adapt. You sold information to both sides, she said evenly. We ensured Virginia would prosper no matter who prevailed. And my husband? Attempted to leverage information he did not fully understand. Ruth felt heat rise behind her ribs. 8 men, she said quietly. You made a pact. Randolph turned toward her. 9. The word struck like ice. Ruth did not move. 9? She repeated. Yes. And you have been so diligent, yet you've overlooked one. Her mind began recalculating instantly. 7 dead, Randolph alive. That accounted for 8. Who? She asked. Randolph watched her carefully. Captain Jonathan Hale. The name landed differently this time. Hale, the investigator, the quiet observer, the eye. Man interviewing servants. He was not Covenant, she said. He was, Randolph replied. Our youngest member. An intelligence officer during the war. Brilliant, cautious, and far more patient than the others. Ruth's pulse steadied rather than raced. If this was true, then she had not been hunted. She had been evaluated. He volunteered to investigate you, Randolph continued. Curiosity about patterns. I encouraged him. Encouraged, not ordered. Hale had stepped forward willingly, a hunter drawn to another predator. And what has he concluded? Ruth asked. That you are either extraordinarily unlucky or extraordinarily capable. A faint smile touched her lips. And which do you believe? Randolph stepped closer. I believe, he said quietly, that we are the only 2 people in this city who understand the game. That was the second signal. He was not preparing to expose her. He was offering alignment. You've eliminated 7 liabilities, he continued. Men who had grown reckless, greedy, indiscreet. You speak as though I performed a service. You did. The audacity of it. Ruth felt something unexpected flicker inside her, not outrage, recognition. He had allowed the others to die, watched them fall one by one, because their removal strengthened his position. You let them marry me, she said, I suspected you, Randolph replied. But suspicion without proof is useless, and their deaths were convenient. A slow understanding crystallized. She had believed she was dismantling the covenant. In truth, she had been refining it. Why tell me this? She asked. Because Hale is close. The third signal. Not a threat. A warning. He's meticulous, Randolph said. He has begun cross-referencing shipping manifests, estate ledgers, testimonies from enslaved servants who have remarkable memories. Ruth's thoughts sharpened. The servants. She had underestimated how carefully they observed. Hale believes in law, Randolph continued. He believes the new republic must be purified of corruption. And you? She asked. I believe. Power must be controlled. Silence again. But if he exposes you, Randolph said, he exposes me. Now the offer revealed itself fully, mutual destruction or mutual preservation. You're proposing alliance, Ruth said. I'm proposing evolution. He moved back to his desk and poured 2 glasses of brandy. August 15th, he said. A private dinner. Hale will attend. I will attend. You will attend. And then? We determine whether Captain Hale remains an asset or becomes an unfortunate casualty. Ruth studied him carefully. This was dangerous terrain. If Hale was Covenant, he might already suspect Randolph's duplicity. If he was not, Randolph could be manipulating them both. How do I know this isn't a trap? She asked. Randolph's gaze sharpened. How do I know you won't poison me tonight? A thin smile curved her lips. Because I haven't. He lifted his glass. Exactly. They drank. But neither swallowed fully. That night, Ruth returned home and opened her journal. She turned back to the list of names. 7 crossed out. Randolph Hale. 9 total. She had miscalculated. Not fatally, but significantly. Her revenge had been precise, yet incomplete. And now the board had shifted. If Hale was Covenant, then killing him aligned with her original purpose. If he was not, then Randolph sought to eliminate a moral obstacle. Either way, August 15th would not end quietly. She began planning immediately, not one poison, 2, one subtle, 1 swift, a contingency within a contingency. Because trust, she had learned, was a liability. Across the city, Captain Jonathan Hale sat in a dim study reviewing testimony. He had compiled dates, marriage licenses, death certificates, estate valuations, 7 husbands, all connected through wartime trade, all dead within predictable intervals. He did not yet know about the Covenant's 9th member, but he suspected a web larger than a widow. He stared at a copy of Jonathan Holloway's execution transcript. The charges had been legitimate. The evidence had been precise. Too precise. As though someone had needed him removed quickly. Hale exhaled slowly. He had begun this investigation seeking a murderess. He now feared he was uncovering something far older, something systemic, a corruption embedded in the Republic's foundation. And Ruth Holloway stood at its center, not as anomaly, but as response. He closed his notebook. August 15th approached. He had accepted Governor Randolph's invitation to dinner. He believed he was stepping into an interrogation. He did not realize he was stepping into a reckoning. On the eve of the dinner, Ruth stood before a mirror in candlelight. She wore deep blue silk, elegant, controlled. She placed a small vial inside a hidden pocket sewn into her gown, and another inside her reticule. 2 strategies, 2 outcomes. She looked at her reflection, not as widow, not as avenger, but as architect. For 13 years, she had believed she was delivering justice. Now she understood something more unsettling. Justice and power were not opposites. They were tools. And on August 15th, 3 people would sit at a table believing they held control. Only one would leave certain of it. On August 15th, 1792, Richmond's sky burned the color of bruised copper. Storm clouds gathered over the James River, low and swollen, as though the heavens themselves were holding breath. The air was heavy, electric, thick with the scent of rain and something more metallic beneath it. Inside Governor Randolph's private residence, the dining room was illuminated by tall beeswax candles arranged with obsessive symmetry. Crystal glasses shimmered, silverware gleamed. The long mahogany table reflected flame like a polished blade. 3 place settings, no servants present. That was deliberate, Ruth noticed immediately. When she entered, Governor Randolph stood this time, a courtesy, or camouflage. "Mrs. Holloway," he greeted smoothly. Radiant as ever, she inclined her head, offering a smile measured to perfection. "Governor." Moments later, Captain Jonathan Hale was announced. He stepped into the room with military precision, broad-shouldered, composed, eyes sharper than they had been weeks earlier. He bowed slightly to Ruth, then to Randolph. No one sat immediately. 3 figures, 3 intentions, 1 table. Finally, Randolph gestured toward their seats. "Let us dine," he said lightly. "It is unwise to negotiate on empty stomachs." The word negotiate did not go unnoticed. Dinner began with civility. Roasted pheasant, stewed apples, fresh bread still warm from the oven. Wine was poured. Conversation floated above the surface. Politics, trade routes, the fragile stability of the young republic. But beneath every exchange was calculation. Ruth watched Hale. He did not drink immediately. He allowed the wine to sit untouched near his hand. Interesting. Randolph, meanwhile, sipped without hesitation. Confident or reckless, after. The second course, Hale set down his fork. "I wonder," he said calmly, "how many revolutions truly end?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Randolph smiled faintly. "History suggests they merely change form." "And what of justice?" Hale continued. "Does it change form as well?" Ruth folded her napkin carefully. "Justice," she said softly, "is often defined by survivors." Hale's gaze shifted to her. "You speak from experience. I speak from observation." A beat of silence. Then Hale reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document. "I've been reviewing. Shipping manifests," he said evenly, "and estate transfers. Patterns are fascinating things." Randolph's expression did not change. "Patterns can be misleading," he replied, "only if one stops counting too soon." Hale unfolded the document and placed it on the table. 3 columns of names, 7 crossed out, 1 circled. Ruth did not need to see it to know. Her pulse remained steady. 7 husbands, Hale said quietly. All former wartime associates, all beneficiaries of discreet trade arrangements, all dead under circumstances medically plausible yet statistically improbable. "And your conclusion?" Ruth asked. "That Mrs. Holloway is either cursed or methodical." Randolph let out a soft chuckle. "I prefer methodical," he said. Hale's eyes flickered to him. "Do you?" Randolph leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Let us stop pretending," he said calmly. "Captain, you know about the covenant." The word fell like thunder. Hale did not react outwardly. "I suspected," he said. 9 members, information brokers during the war." Ruth's gaze snapped to him, almost imperceptibly. 9. He knew. 7 are dead, Hale continued. "One sits at this table." His eyes moved to Randolph. "And the 9th? Ruth asked softly. Hale's gaze returned to her. "I was approached," he said. "In 1781, young, ambitious, offered access to information streams that would ensure Virginia's prosperity regardless of outcome." "And did you accept?" she asked. I observed. A careful answer. Randolph's smile thinned. "You were more than an observer," he said quietly. "You benefited." Hale's jaw tightened. "I believed we were safeguarding the colony. I did not realize we were selling it." Silence. Then Hale reached for his wine glass. He lifted it slightly, paused, then set it back down without drinking. I also discovered something else, he said. Ruth's fingers brushed the hidden seam in her gown. Jonathan Holloway was not executed for treason alone, Hale continued. He was eliminated because he threatened exposure. Randolph exhaled slowly. You are treading dangerous ground, Captain. Truth often is. Hale's gaze shifted to Ruth again. I believe Mrs. Holloway discovered the same truth. And I believe her marriages were not accidents. Ruth met his eyes steadily. And if they were not? Then we must ask whether her actions were murder or retribution. Randolph's tone sharpened. This is absurd. Is it? Hale replied. He leaned forward slightly. I have testimony from 2 former household servants. They recall tonics prepared privately, powders mixed carefully, notes burned in the hearth. Ruth felt a flicker of irritation. She had underestimated loose threads. But I lack physical proof, Hale admitted. No bodies exhumed, no chemical analyses, only pattern. And pattern is not conviction, Randolph said. No, Hale agreed. But tonight is not about conviction. He reached into his coat once more and withdrew a small glass vial. Ruth's breath did not change. Randolph's eyes narrowed. I retrieved this from a warehouse shipment seized last winter, Hale said. 8 velvet pouches, 8 wedding rings, and 8 vials containing trace amounts of poison. The room seemed to contract. Rain began tapping against the windows. Ruth's mind accelerated. The warehouse. She had sent those boxes abroad for safekeeping. Someone had intercepted them. You kept trophies, Hale said softly. Evidence, Ruth corrected before she could stop herself. The word echoed. All 3 of them understood what had just occurred. Admission, not of guilt, of intention. Randolph stood abruptly. This has gone far enough. But Hale remained seated. No, Governor. It has not gone far enough. His gaze shifted between them. You allowed 7 men to die, he said to Randolph. Perhaps encouraged it. And Mrs. Holloway? He paused. You sought justice outside the law. Ruth's voice was steady. The law executed my husband. The law was manipulated, Hale replied, and so was I. Lightning flashed beyond the windows. For a split second, the room was illuminated starkly, 3 faces exposed without shadow. Then darkness returned. Hale reached for his wine again. This time, he drank. Randolph stiffened slightly. Ruth's eyes narrowed. No immediate reaction. No cough. No tremor. Interesting. Randolph lifted his own glass and drank fully. Ruth remained still. 2 men drinking freely. Had they anticipated poison, or was she the only one who came prepared? Hale set down his glass carefully. There are 3 paths forward, he said quietly. Exposure, alliance, or elimination. Randolph's gaze hardened. Be careful, Captain. I am, Hale replied. He turned to Ruth. If I expose this, you hang. If I expose him, the Republic fractures. If I say nothing, corruption continues. And elimination, she asked, requires courage. Rain intensified, drumming against the roof like distant artillery. Randolph's hand slipped subtly toward the inside of his coat. Ruth saw it. Hale saw it. 3 minds calculating at once. The candles flickered violently as wind forced itself down the chimney. The room filled with smoke and stormlight, and in that chaos, something shifted. Hale's expression changed first, a tightening around his eyes, a subtle swallow. He blinked once, twice. Ruth watched closely. He reached for the edge of the table. Randolph stood completely now. What have you done? He demanded. Hale looked at his wine glass, then at Ruth, then at Randolph. I replaced the decanter before dinner, he said hoarsely. If either of you intended to poison me, he stopped mid-sentence. His breath hitched. Ruth felt a surge of cold clarity. He had anticipated poison and introduced his own variable. Randolph staggered slightly, not dramatically, but enough. Hale's hand gripped the table tighter. "The question," he whispered, voice thinning, "is which of us prepared the deadlier draft?" The storm outside roared. Inside, 3 strategists realized the same truth at once. Every glass on the table had been touched, and none of them were entirely certain whose hand had sealed their fate. Captain Jonathan Hale collapsed first, not violently, not theatrically. His fingers loosened from the edge of the table, and his body folded with a slow, dreadful inevitability, like a structure whose foundation had quietly rotted from within. The candles trembled in their holders. Rain hammered the windows. Governor Randolph staggered backward, gripping the back of his chair as though the room itself had tilted. Ruth remained seated, still, watching. Hale's breathing grew shallow, uneven. A sheen of sweat formed across his brow. Randolph turned toward her, fury igniting through the haze of whatever now coursed through his veins. "You," he rasped. Ruth did not answer immediately. Instead, she reached calmly for her own glass of wine and raised it to her lips. She drank. Fully, deliberately. Then she set the glass down with precision. "If I had poisoned the decanter," she said quietly, "I would not have shared it." Randolph's vision blurred for a moment. He blinked, hard. Hale on the floor forced himself onto one elbow. "I replaced the wine," he choked. "But not the brandy." Randolph's eyes snapped to the sideboard. The brandy. He had poured it himself, earlier, before dinner. Only 2 glasses had been filled, his and Ruth's. A realization crashed through him. "You," he began. Ruth stood slowly. "Governor," she said, voice low and steady, "you invited me to a battlefield." Her hand disappeared into the folds of her gown. Randolph lunged instinctively, but his movement faltered midway, muscles rebelling. Hale dragged himself toward the table leg, vision doubling. "What did you do?" he demanded through clenched teeth. Ruth's gaze softened slightly as she looked down at him. "You believed you were the only one who understood patterns," she said. "You replaced the wine, yes. I saw you do it." Hale's pupils widened. "But you did not account for contingency." She turned her eyes to Randolph. "And you, Governor. You underestimated how long I have waited." Randolph's breathing had grown labored now. Sweat soaked through his collar. "You poisoned the brandy," he whispered. "No," Ruth replied, calmly. "I adjusted it." She withdrew a small vial from her sleeve and held it up between her fingers. "Digitalis," she said. "In moderate doses it creates irregular heartbeat, weakness, disorientation." Randolph staggered against the wall. "You won't die," she continued evenly. "Not immediately." Hale's voice cut in, strained but sharp. "And me?" Ruth looked down at him. "You were never my target." His jaw tightened. "But you are an obstacle." She moved toward the fireplace where flames danced hungrily against stacked oak logs. "Tonight," she continued, "was never about poison. It was about proof." She pulled a folded stack of papers from inside her reticule. Hale recognized them instantly, his investigative notes, shipping manifests, testimonies. "How?" "You left your satchel unattended during our last meeting," she said quietly. "You are thorough, Captain, but not invisible." She tossed the papers into the fire. The edges curled, blackened, disintegrated. Randolph made a desperate step forward. "You think destroying documents saves you?" he hissed. "No," she replied. "It saves you." He stared at her in confusion. "You cannot expose me without exposing yourself," she continued. "And you cannot prosecute me without revealing the covenant." Hale pushed himself to his knees, fighting the dizziness clawing at his skull. "The covenant is already fractured," he rasped. 7 dead, secrets rotting. "And yet," she said softly, "power remains." She approached Randolph slowly. You let them marry me, she said, her voice no longer masked with civility. You watched them die. You refined your influence while I executed your liabilities. Randolph's face contorted, not only from the poison now seizing his heart, but from recognition. You were useful, he muttered. Yes, she agreed. I was. Lightning split the sky outside. Thunder followed instantly. Hale's vision blurred again. His pulse thundered in his ears. You miscalculated, he forced out. Ruth turned to him. No, Captain. I evolved. She stepped closer to Randolph until they stood nearly chest to chest. You signed the letter condemning my husband, she whispered. He signed his own fate, Randolph shot back weakly. He attempted to blackmail us. He attempted to reveal you. Revelation would have destabilized Virginia during war. Truth would have saved him. Randolph's body trembled violently now. You're no different, he gasped. You manipulate death for advantage. Ruth's eyes hardened. I never claimed purity. She reached out suddenly and grabbed Randolph by the collar, steadying him as his legs buckled. Hale watched through narrowing vision as she guided the governor toward the massive wooden desk in the adjoining library. Help me, she ordered calmly to Hale. He stared at her in disbelief. If he survives fully coherent, she said sharply, he will rebuild the covenant with new faces, new greed, new betrayal. And if he dies, Hale demanded, then the corruption fractures permanently. Hale hesitated. Law warred with reality inside him. He had sworn to uphold justice. But what was justice here? Expose everything and plunge the fragile republic into scandal, or contain the rot at its core? Randolph sagged heavily against the desk. Ruth moved swiftly. She pulled a small dagger from the drawer. Hale's eyes widened. Don't! She slashed her own forearm, a controlled, deliberate cut. Blood spilled onto the polished wood. Randolph stared at her in stunned horror. She grabbed his hand and pressed the dagger into it. Then she forced his fingers around the handle. You're insane, he breathed. No, she said quietly. I am thorough. She guided his arm forward sharply. The blade plunged into his abdomen. His body jerked violently. She stepped back instantly. Randolph collapsed to the floor, dragging the dagger free as he fell. Blood pooled beneath him. Hale froze. He was dying already, she interrupted. Now it is mutual violence. She turned toward Hale, her expression unreadable. You can testify that he attacked me, that you intervened too late. Hale's mind raced through implications. A governor dead in private residence, a widow wounded, an investigator present. You expect me to lie? He demanded. I expect you to choose. Randolph's breathing had become wet, shallow. He reached weakly toward Hale. Don't trust. His hand fell. Stillness settled. Only the storm remained. Hale stared at the corpse, then at Ruth, then at the fire consuming his evidence. You orchestrated this from the moment you walked in, he said hollowly. No, she replied. From the moment Jonathan died. She approached him slowly. The covenant is finished, she said. 7 gone, the leader dead, the records burned. You kept copies, Hale accused. She did not deny it. Power is never relinquished entirely. He forced himself upright, though dizziness still clouded his senses. If I expose you, you destroy yourself. She finished calmly. You admitted association. You accepted their invitations. You benefited. He closed his eyes briefly. She was right. Exposure would not cleanse the Republic. It would reveal its foundation had always been compromised. And if I align with you? He asked quietly. Ruth studied him carefully. Then you ensure no new covenant rises. Lightning flashed again, illuminating her blood-stained sleeve. You become guardian rather than accuser. Hale looked down at Randolph's body, then back at her. You frighten me, he admitted. She gave a faint, humorless smile. Good. Footsteps sounded distantly. House guards responding to the storm, perhaps. Time was collapsing. Ruth moved quickly now. She smeared blood across the desk in chaotic patterns. She knocked over a chair. She pressed her wounded arm against Randolph's coat. When guards burst into the library moments later, they found chaos. The governor dead, Captain Hale shaken, Mrs. Holloway pale and bleeding. He attacked her, Hale heard himself say. The words left his mouth before he fully accepted them. Ruth swayed convincingly. I tried to defend myself, she whispered. The storm howled, and in its cover, the final member of the Covenant died. But the woman who dismantled it did not. She adapted, again. Governor Edmund Randolph was buried with honors. The official story was clean, tragic, controlled, a private dinner, a dispute, a sudden act of violence. The governor, under strain from political pressure, allegedly suffered a fit of instability and attacked Mrs. Ruth Holloway. Captain Jonathan Hale intervened, but too late. In the struggle, Randolph was fatally wounded. The widow survived. Barely. Richmond mourned its fallen statesman. Richmond pitied its wounded socialite, and Richmond never learned the truth. Because the truth had been negotiated, Ruth's injury healed cleanly. The scar along her forearm was thin and deliberate, almost elegant in its precision. She wore it uncovered at social gatherings, allowing speculation to circulate. Some called her resilient, some called her cursed. None called her guilty. Captain Jonathan Hale ensured that. He delivered a measured, unwavering testimony before the UN magistrate. His account never wavered. Randolph had grown agitated. Words escalated. A blade drawn. Chaos followed. It was plausible. It was contained. It was sufficient. No mention of the Covenant. No mention of 9 men. No mention of velvet pouches and poison vials. The Republic moved forward, and in its movement, it buried its rot. Weeks later, Hale stood alone in his study staring at a locked drawer. Inside it lay a single surviving document, one Ruth had allowed him to keep. A fragment of ciphered writing from her journal, not names, not confessions. Just a sentence. Justice, when denied by law, becomes architecture. He had read it a dozen times. Each time it unsettled him more. Because she had not killed randomly. She had not killed impulsively. She had constructed outcomes. He had chosen containment over exposure. He told himself it was for the Republic. But sometimes, late at night, he wondered if it was also because he admired her clarity. That frightened him more than anything. Ruth Holloway did not remarry. Richmond expected she would. Expected another alliance. Another consolidation of wealth. Instead, she redirected her resources, quietly, deliberately. She invested in trade routes no one else anticipated, purchased shipping shares along the Chesapeake, funded land development near Western territories poised for expansion. Money flowed, influence followed. But she no longer needed husbands. She had learned something far more enduring. Marriage had been entry. Widowhood had been camouflage. Now she operated openly, though still invisibly. Her name appeared on no controversial legislation, yet legislators dined in her home. Judges sought her counsel. Merchants consulted her forecasts. She became what the Covenant had attempted to be, but without partners, without shared liability, power centralized, controlled. She did not call it revenge anymore. She called it equilibrium. Years passed. The revolution faded into textbooks and commemorations. New conflicts rose. New politicians gained prominence. The young republic grew louder, messier, hungrier. And corruption did not disappear. It evolved, as it always had. Ruth observed it with detached patience. When whispers of new covert trade arrangements reached her ears, she did not panic. She adjusted. She redirected investments away from compromised men. She allowed certain alliances to collapse under scrutiny she subtly encouraged. She never poisoned again. There was no need. Reputation had become her weapon. Those who crossed her found credit lines. Withdrawn. Business opportunities vanished, letters of recommendation dissolved. Quieter form of elimination, less dramatic, more permanent. Captain Hale remained in public service. He rose through ranks steadily, respected, disciplined, incorruptible in reputation. But privately, he maintained a singular habit. Every year, on August 15th, he walked alone along the James River. He would stop near the docks where seized shipments were once catalogued, and he would consider the 8 velvet pouches that had nearly rewritten history. He had destroyed most of them after the trial. Burned the rings, crushed the vials, except one. He kept a single vial locked away, a reminder, not of her crimes, but of his choice, because he had not merely saved Ruth Holloway, he had preserved stability over truth, and sometimes, in quieter moments, he questioned whether that distinction mattered. Ruth aged with composure. Gray touched her hair, but not her posture. Her eyes remained sharp, calculating. Visitors still found themselves measured within seconds of entering her drawing room. She had outlived the Covenant, outlived Randolph, outlived the men who believed power belonged to them by right of war. In her later years, she began writing more frequently in cipher. Not confessions, not apologies, reflections, on loyalty, on betrayal, on the elasticity of morality during nation building. One entry, dated simply 1799, read, "Men believe they build nations with muskets and speeches. In truth, nations are shaped by what is concealed." She never clarified whether that concealment was sin or necessity. When Ruth Holloway died in 1803, it was of natural causes. No scandal, no accusation. Her funeral was well attended, respected, somber. She was remembered as a woman of resilience, intelligence, and mysterious strength. No one mentioned the 7 husbands in accusatory tones anymore. Time had dulled suspicion into folklore. Captain Hale stood at the back of the service, silent. He did not weep. But when the casket was lowered into the earth, he felt something close to finality, not because she had been defeated, but because she had completed her design. Years later, long after Hale himself was gone, construction workers renovating an old riverside warehouse discovered a hidden compartment beneath warped floorboards. Inside it sat a small pine box, weathered, unremarkable. Within it were 8 empty velvet pouches and a 9th, still holding, a wedding ring. No vial, no poison, just the ring. Unclaimed. Historians would later debate its meaning. Was it intended for Hale? Was it symbolic? Was it evidence that she had once considered him target number 9, or proof that she had spared him deliberately? No record clarified it. Her journal, when eventually uncovered decades later, contained no direct confession. Only that single line repeated on the final page: "Justice, when denied by law, becomes architecture." The Republic survived. It expanded westward. It fractured and reformed through wars and reforms and endless reinvention. Corruption persisted. So did reformers. And somewhere within its foundation lay the quiet influence of a woman history never fully understood. Ruth Holloway had not sought chaos. She had sought correction. But correction without transparency leaves residue, and residue becomes legacy. In the end, she did not dismantle power. She mastered it. She did not expose corruption. She absorbed it, and in doing so, she proved a final, unsettling truth. Revolutions do not eliminate darkness. They redistribute it. And sometimes the most dangerous architects of justice are those who survive long enough to redesign the rules.